that I think go to the heart of this book that I tried to write. Number one, Fithian really learns to be a patriot and a revolutionary during his college days at Princeton. Princeton University, then known as the College of New Jersey, was really a haven for patriotic activity. The relationship between Presbyterianism and patriotism was powerful during this period, and the foremost spokesman of this connection between patriotism and Presbyterianism was John Witherspoon. Witherspoon trained his students not only to be good Christians, morally upright, but he also taught them that God was on the side of liberty. God was always on the side of freedom. And if there was a tyrannical force like the British government that was taking away that liberty, that freedom, then not only should you rebel against them because they're taking away your liberty, but also because if you do, God will be on their side. So there's a lot of the sort of language that we see today, even in American politics, about this being a Christian nation or God being on the side of America, all these things that you hear, really find a lot of their roots in 18th century Princeton and the kind of education that Philip Vickers Fithian got there. So it's really there that he learns these sort of, how to be someone who loves God and someone who loves country. And everybody who comes out of Witherspoon's Princeton embraces these ideas. In some ways, I think Princeton is very underrated for its contribution to the American Revolution. In my opinion, and I'm working on a second book down the road on this, in my opinion, it's the Presbyterians in New Jersey and Pennsylvania that are the ones who are the most important revolutionaries of all, because they are the dominant religious group in the region. They are infused with this notion that God is on their side in this event. And King George III even calls the American Revolution at one point a Presbyterian rebellion, because they're so adamant in their beliefs. And Fithian certainly comes at it. There's no question that he's going to support the Patriots during the American Revolution. That never even comes up, that possibility. The great scene when he's in Virginia and Robert Carter, he's unsure where Robert Carter, an Anglican Virginian, stands on the war. And he's very concerned in his diary that could Mr. Carter not be supporting this war? Could he be? Now, eventually Carter does, and Fithian's much relieved to find this out. But that's the first point. And so my book spends a lot of time taking a few sidetracks from Fithian's life to talk about this religious and political world that gave him birth, at least as a patriot. Secondly, of course, patriots act. Right? They do things that are patriotic, that are revolutionary, that are radical, sometimes even illegal acts, such as the Greenwich tea burning, which occurred here, which we're commemorating today and tomorrow. Fithian writes about the tea burning. There's never anything definite, he says, about the fact that he was actually involved in the tea burning, but he certainly, in all probability, he had something to do with it. He had visited, as some of you know, Annapolis on his way back from Virginia, where he had seen the burning of the Peggy Stewart, the tea ship there. He had gotten the idea. We don't know whether he communicated that to anyone up here, but there's strong evidence to suggest this event may have been modeled on the one in Maryland. Again, he's also a Presbyterian, though. I think what we've missed about the Greenwich tea burning here, and this is what I talk about in the book, is the religious dimensions of this tea burning, for good or for bad. However, I'm a historian. I'm not suggesting that either way is the right way. But, for good or for bad, almost all of the people who are on that monument who were involved in this tea burning were Presbyterians. Very few people who have written about the tea burning have made a point of that they would have been directly connected, not directly, but indirectly, with the whole Princeton mindset. Enoch Green was a graduate of Princeton. Andrew Hunter was a graduate of Princeton. Now, granted, they went there before Witherspoon, but they would have embraced Witherspoon's ideas. There were 3 Presbyterian churches closely within 10 miles of one another down here. So, while this was certainly a patriotic act, a political act, an act of rebellion against the British tyranny, the way that these Presbyterian tea burners, these young men, understood this was very much through the grid of their God and country faith that they imbibed from John Witherspoon, even if they didn't directly study under him. So I think that's a forgotten piece of the motivation behind why these people burned tea in the way they did. And it's something I try to recover a little bit here in this book. A third point I want to make about the revolution is, for Fithian at least, Fithian, as I try to argue, goes through what might be called almost a religious conversion to the American Revolution. And what do I mean by that? And what happens to him is, he goes through John Witherspoon's training. He learns all of these Revolutionary War principles and ideas. They're very much in his head at the time. But it's really events like the tea burning. It's events when he's out on the frontier and he begins to see these common men and women, uneducated men and women, now unlike him, right, who is now educated, sort of an educated gentleman, rising up in 1775 and 1776, forming militias, marching east to join the Continental Army. And Fithian is deeply, deeply moved by these people. There's this great scene I record in the book, which comes from his diary, where he's sitting on a rock on the Susquehanna River, overlooking the river and assuming he's writing as he's there. And he talks about the fact that, again, I'm summarizing, paraphrasing here, I know what the American Revolution is about. I know that one must resist tyranny. I know God is on the side of this revolution. But am I willing to stake my life for these ideas? And in many ways I compare it to his Christian conversion when he's a young man. You know, he understands the gospel. He's been raised and catechized in a Presbyterian church, but yet in the 1766 in his diary he goes through this conversion experience to make it real to his own life. And in a similar way, he makes a political conversion. On that rock, you know, this great moment, he writes and he says to himself, and envisions himself, I should say, fighting with the American army, battling against evil and cruel General Howe, he writes at one point, and even possibly dying in battle. And I think it's at that moment, if you read the diaries carefully, that he then is finally a convert. Intellectually, he'd always been a convert. But now he's willing, immediately thereafter, he signs up and he's ready to do his duty. And of course, it costs him his life, and so it was a very meaningful experience there. So I talk about this, what I call this political, religious sort of conversion, if you will, to the American Revolution. And you see it developing over time as he's out there on the frontier, being greatly inspired by these people marching east to join the army. And then finally, the revolution has a profound effect on his relationship with Betsy in some ways. While he's out there in the Susquehanna Valley, he's debating whether or not he's going to get married to Betsy. He writes about her constantly, about, you know, what she's like as an old, will I still love her when she's an old woman? You know, and he has this very graphic, somewhat cruel description of her as an old woman, where her teeth are falling out, and her, you know, and I will still love her. You know, he kind of says. I mean, it's this sort of awful paragraph where he's describing her in old age. It's all. I printed the whole thing in the book. It was just so sensational. But I wanted to close by just reading that passage from the book, because it's very interesting how the revolution is going to affect, or maybe not affect, in Fithian's case, his decision to get married. If I